General, your inhibitor has been lost. Wearing the book author, Xiao Chiking copywriting, through an accidental time travel, Gu Huan became the youngest alpha general in the novel. He is handsome, aloof, and powerful, and admired by thousands of people. Even if it is a villain, this is a proper Shuangwen character design. Gu Huan is so happy, shit. Looking at the needle holes in my arms, the haggard eyes, and the home that has been dismantled into an open-air convertible. He suspects he is an addict. Doctor, no, you are just a very ordinary Omega who used inhibitors during the febrile period. Gu Huan, you are kidding me. Doctor, an Omega of your age who has not been marked is very likely a dog leash. Gu Huan, I believe this. To survive. Kaolin, Senior, Zhiwa, single dog, can only apply for marriage online. Marriage self-description, older, hot impaired, not guaranteed not to beat someone in heat, not guaranteed not to beat someone to death. In the end, someone actually came to this painful marriage request, and it was the prince who wanted to eradicate himself as the villain in the original text. Jazza must repay the wolf dog. A prince attack times abstinence. Bright. A dark zero general. Accept the so-called wolf dog. When it hates you, it is a wolf. When it likes you, it is a dog. Edible tips. 1. The protagonist is a heartthrob. Cool text. 2. Strong and strong, the text does not bear children. 3. Don't pay attention to the private setting of ABO world. Content tags, strong interstellar crossing book. Shuangwen search keywords, protagonist, Gu Huan, choose England supporting role, pre-acquisition of I Doubt I'm a Scholar will be released in October. Others, ABO 1 sentence introduction, the villain will be if he recruits a mortal enemy for marriage. Comment on the work, as a half-elf mercenary who died in the Western fantasy world, Gu Huan once again traveled to the interstellar era. This time he is the general of the empire. He is beautiful, strong, and talented. This is a proper cool character design, but he is a villain. Betrayed the prince, a good buddy, and almost killed someone. Whitewash yourself according to the routine. It's not like he did it, so he doesn't do it. Wanting to escape as soon as possible, the story is full of side effects. Why is this villain still an Omega? Facing the threat to his life if he is not marked again, Gu Huan can only apply for marriage online, but he is very surprised by the people who come to apply for the marriage request. The writing is fluent, the plot is unconventional, has unique ideas, the characters are vividly portrayed, and the protagonist has a strong personality charm. It vividly describes the love story between a iceberg beauty Xiao and his wolf dog. The emotional line is sweet and sincere, it is enviable, and the career line is rising steadily and skyrocketing. All in all, sweet and cool is well worth watching. Under the Star River splashed with ink, a luxurious banquet has just begun. The luxurious and classical record player sings the lost movement. The beautiful tone covers up the slightly abrupt call in the dark corner. General, General. As the people around him kept calling, the young man slowly opened his eyes. His eyes had an incomparably magnificent and peculiar pupil color, indifferent and hazy like fog, and the light passed through them, as if golden quicksand was flowing in them, lightly and blinked lightly, looking at everything around him, looking a little dazed. If it wasn't for the natural paralyzed face, Gu Huan would definitely be as calm as blinking his eyes now. After all, the last second he was still in the magical world, because his strength was no match for the magical creatures. He died tragically under the jagged teeth of the monsters. Blood and gravel covered his entire eye sockets, and the next second he saw this, a magnificent banquet hall. Looking up, various chandeliers are suspended layer by layer, and the golden streamer shuttles through them, shining brightly. Above the chandelier, there is a holographic projection of the universe, and the endless starry sky seems to be within reach. But this is obviously not the world of Western fantasy, nor is it the 21st century he was in before Western fantasy. King Juan's eyebrows frowned involuntarily. Did he wear it again after traveling through Western fantasy? Before Gu Huan could clarify the situation, the person who just woke him up asked again cautiously. This time he was already awake, and his tone was sweeter than last time. "Admiral? I didn't bother you, did I?" The beautiful boy in front of him, holding a glass of red wine, looked at him with deer-like pupils, eyes shining with admiration. Gu Huan's heart skipped a beat. "Lord Admiral? Who?" At the moment of Gu Huan's doubts, countless broken memories rushed into his head. It took all his strength to maintain his superficial calm amidst the explosive information bombardment, and he frowned tightly. He really wore it again. The original owner of this body is the youngest Legion commander in the history of the Empire. He is outstandingly talented, handsome, and admired by thousands of people. He has just led the Legion to conquer the interstellar pirates and was promoted from lieutenant general to general. This is an event held for him. At the celebration banquet, all the colleagues and subordinates in the army were present. It stands to reason that from the dying state to the body of this proud son of heaven, others should wake up with laughter from their dreams, but Gu Huan himself can't laugh. It's all because he has such a good memory after learning magic, so good that he even remembers a deadly cannon fodder villain in a novel he read in the previous life. The entire experience of this general in the first half of his life was clearly exactly the same as that cannon fodder. Pressing his pale, clean fingers tightly on the top of his forehead, Gu Huan carefully checked his memory to make sure that he did not remember anything wrong. In the novel, the Admiral appears to be a good friend of the Prince of the Empire, but in fact he has been working for the uncle who wants to overthrow the prince and usurp the throne. Like the Emperor's uncle, he regarded the prince in the story as a thorn in his side. The original owner did a lot of bad things for him, and was finally discovered by the prince and became a traitor spurned by everyone. Only then did the protagonist of the novel become a marshal after being appreciated by the prince, and finally became the emperor's story. Right now, at the moment when he was promoted to admiral, the original owner had just thrown the prince on a mech that had lost its energy, watched the prince get lost in the black hole, and came back alone to claim all the merits. He and the prince may not be able to be friends. Not only that. Once things are exposed, the admiral has nothing to do. The significance of the prince choose England to the entire interstellar people is self-evident. He is the prince, the one who will inherit this imperial alliance in the future. Under such monstrous power, what is even more rare is that he is not a dude, with outstanding talent, good looks, never gets along with others regardless of his birth, and is the dream lover of many Omega, with countless followers. Because the crown prince disappeared before Gu Huan made contributions, the general didn't even have a formal honor ceremony, let alone let other people know that this matter was indirectly prompted by Gu Huan, and it would be a dead end. When Gu Huan was worrying, he didn't notice some subtle changes in the young man whom he ignored. Because the general kept silent, the Omega boy mistakenly thought that Gu Huan didn't like his approach, which made the Omega, who had a good impression of Gu Huan, completely lost his composure. The more you are rejected, the more you want to cling. The cool smell on this alpha's body is almost drugged and depraved. "General," he murmured with a flushed face. Gu Huan was pulled by his cuffs, and he finally came back to his senses and realized that something was wrong. The Omega in front of him was in heat. An Omega in heat had a strong smell of pheromone that made any Alpha unable to control himself. However, Gu Huan was not as uncontrollable as the interstellar adolescent education textbook said, and was even a little inexplicably irritable. With a serious expression on his face, he reached out and grabbed the opponent's shoulder, and pushed forward. Omega didn't expect him to make such an abrupt move. The wine glass in his hand fell to the ground, splashing all over the place, making one's nerves numb. The exclamation resounded throughout the banquet. "What?" Several non-commissioned officers who were communicating were taken aback when they heard this too tragic squeaky moan. They had already smelled the smell of Omega pheromone from the general. But they thought it was the general's fanatics who sneaked in, so they kept turning a blind eye and didn't care so much. After all, how could Omega threaten the safety of Alpha? But they didn't expect the Omega to suddenly scream. Could it be, the general forcibly marked the other party regardless of Omega's wishes? It is against the law to force Alpha to mark Omega. Although they felt that Gu Huan would not do such a thing, they put down the things they were holding in a hurry, and ran to the corner with a terrified expression. General! No! When they arrived at the accident site and saw clearly what had happened, they couldn't blurt out the words of restraint that were on their lips. Because of the situation at the scene, it was obviously different from their imagination. The male god-level Alpha of the Empire stood aside very calmly, and his movements were neat to control the Omega who was in heat. The method of subduing without leaving any room was not like encountering an Omega who was in heat, but rather like encountering an Omega who was about to be arrested. The prisoner. Seeing such a scene, the expressions on the faces of several Alpha non-commissioned officers froze for a moment. Which Alpha have you ever seen do such a thing? What are you stunned for? His cold eyes passed by several Alphas who were standing there blankly. Gu Huan lowered his head and looked at the Omega who was suppressed by him, who was in heat, and a flash of understanding suddenly flashed across his eyes. They probably dare not touch an Omega in heat. Thinking of this question, Gu Huan didn't force him anymore, so he let go of his hand, pushed the estrus Omega towards the Beta security guards who rushed over, and ordered in a cold voice, "Take him away." Beta, who worked as a security guard in such a conference venue, had never seen anything. They caught Omega, and immediately responded without any doubts. "Yes, General. I have long heard that there is special pheromone resistance training in the army, but just now other Alphas dare not touch an Omega in heat, but the General can be so calm. He really deserves to be a general at such a young age. Lord General, you really have a firm will, far beyond ordinary people." After a few words of emotion from the bottom of their hearts, they quickly wrapped the Omega, which had collapsed into a puddle of spring water on the sofa, with a blanket that could block pheromones, and left the banquet center. Seeing that Omega left smoothly, Gu Huan breathed a sigh of relief. Except for the service staff, all Alphas in this bar, if the pheromone riot happened just now, he would not have to go to the palace to accept the award ceremony, because the military court might welcome him more. The few remaining officers obviously also thought about how serious what happened just now, and they all showed expressions of self-blame and lowered their heads deeply. "My lord, it's our fault that we didn't check the people coming in and out. Please punish me." Gu Huan frowned slightly. His gaze swept over these subordinates. Several adjutants and captains who were swept by his eyes immediately stiffened. The admiral is undoubtedly good-looking. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been selected by magazines as the most beautiful man in the universe several times. A pair of beautifully curved peach blossom eyes cast a cold, almost mechanical cold light. The bridge of the nose is high and the lips are thin. The ear side is even more beautiful, like a sculpture. However, everyone dare not comment on his appearance while ignoring his aura. They couldn't help crying in their hearts. "It's over." The general glanced at them. "Careless people like them will be packed up and go home soon." They actually almost let an Omega in estrus get close to the general. Just when they were completely desperate and even closed their eyes, the admiral's serious and cold voice fell in their ears. "Get your papers ready. 10,000 words. Okay, 10,000 word self-criticism, we are too miserable. 1. 10,000 words? After reacting for a while, aftertaste. Several people opened their eyes and looked at each other. What? A 10,000 word review? That's it. Do you have any objections? Gu Huan frowned slightly. They categorically deny it. No. Under the bright light of the banquet chandelier, Gu Huan's face was as cold as ever, but the adjutants could feel the rare tenderness hidden under this face. According to the general's previous practice, he would definitely not spare them so easily. Because the general has very high requirements for the army. To put it bluntly, no mistakes are allowed. To put it bluntly, it is too harsh. There is no legion like them, which can be kicked out of the establishment for just a little mistake. But their legion has this practice. Is the general in such a good mood today? Or has he really changed his temper? Several adjutants had such doubts in their minds. Gu Huan didn't know what they were thinking. He just wants to go home quickly. Not only because he wanted to change the pants that were stained a lot due to the splashed wine on the floor, but also because from the moment he came into contact with that Omega, he felt an inexplicable irritability in his heart. The subconscious is telling him, "Go back quickly. Hurry up." After arriving at the general's mansion, other people are not allowed to approach. Gu Huan has fallen into a state of unconsciousness. He doesn't know what he's done. Until the early morning of the second day. He was aroused by the sharp alarm body of his own AI, and only then regained his sanity. The damaged area of the house is 70%. The damage rate of furniture is as high as 89%. Safety shielding is activated. Gu Huan was suffering from a splitting headache, and looked at this house with a black question mark, except for the quilt he was holding, which had become a ruined house. Open last night's video. Gu Huan ordered hoarsely. Who demolished my home while I was unconscious? Yes, master. Looking at the video, he rolled over and over, wreaking havoc. A mental wave demolished half of the wall, and then took out a needle from a fallen drawer and injected himself with an inexplicable liquid. Gu Huan is very suspicious now. In my incomplete memory, the original owner was probably a drug addict. Although it is still uncertain whether it is the sequelae of addiction, but Gu Huan is indeed weak now. He stood up staggeringly, searched for the location of the bathroom in the ruins, and walked over with his legs. Most of the mirror in the bathroom was shattered, and the figure could barely be seen clearly. This is the first time Gu Huan saw the face of this body clearly. It really looked exactly like the half-elf he had in the wizarding world, only thinner and paler. After carefully confirming that his haggard appearance after taking drugs was not very obvious, Gu Huan lowered his head again, rolled up his sleeves, and the moment he saw his arm, he gasped. The pale skin made the bruising needles even more terrifying. It was so densely packed that even the underlying blood vessels were blocked so that it was impossible to see clearly. What happened in the video is indeed true. Gu Huan shook his head helplessly, and put down his sleeves. I can really do it. But no matter how hard he tries to recall, the relevant memories that he can recall at present are all from the ambitious uncle in the article. The other party will provide him with some kind of injection, but he doesn't know what it is, because as long as when he thought about it deeply, his head would ache. Gu Huan lowered his eyes slightly. If you really want to know what's going on with you, you probably have to ask that uncle, Duke Chu Feng Yuan. Thinking of that person, Gu Huan felt a little apprehensive. That's a total squint-yade monster. Hiding a knife in a smile is not enough to describe his horror. An ultimate boss that can only be defeated by the protagonist group after surviving to the end, what kind of trouble can it be? If he could. He really didn't want to touch each other. But it's impossible not to touch. Even if he doesn't go to the Duke will come to him. Because before he crossed over, the original owner had already reported the prince's disappearance into the black hole to the Duke. A conversation is inevitable. He can only protect himself as much as possible. Just when Gu Huan was silently worrying about his body. The fact that the general's mansion opened the security shielding device has been transmitted to the entire Jialan planet through the interstellar security network. For a while, flying police cars, flying ambulances, and flying cameras from many media stations surrounded General Gu's mansion, which is located in the capital of Jialan in the Canaan galaxy, without leaving a single gap. The military even parked warships in outer space. Compared with such a big scene, the entire general's mansion was calm and peaceful. Like waiting for a blockbuster transition. Interstellar netizens stared at the live broadcast on the Starnet, for fear of missing something they couldn't miss. As it turned out, they were right. Fuck, what kind of beauty is this? As if understanding the preferences of the audience, the live broadcast satellite suddenly narrowed the distance between the cameras. The camera was shifted from the mighty crowd around to the person who appeared from the gate of the general's mansion, and a super close-up was also given. The young man's black hair, which was as exquisite as knitwear, slid down his ears and gently fell on his shoulders, his graceful chin was slightly raised, his golden eyes were slightly drooping, and his eyelashes cast a fan-shaped shadow on his white eyelids. In the shot looking down from above, the beauty is breathless. It is like a prince who has lost his homeland, with incomparable nobility and loneliness hidden in the gloom. Countless netizens stayed in the live broadcast room, crazily discussing the incident of Gu Huan's appearance just now. Not only them, but the people inside the cordon are actually even crazier than them. Master Gu! Master Gu! Are you okay? Such worried voices kept coming and going, which seemed a little confusing. They are all imperial policemen and imperial Wehrmacht soldiers. These people have deeper feelings for the soldiers on the front line than ordinary people, so their performance is more fanatical. The person who is always so calm, the thin lips that are pale and almost faded have always maintained a straight arc. Wu Dai, the deputy director of the Jialan Star police station, stepped forward, looked at the dark-haired man with deep and quiet eyes, and couldn't help but admire secretly in his heart. You really deserve to be an admiral, and you really don't panic when things happen. If he had the courage back then, he would have gone to the battlefield. He gave a military salute and asked with a very respectful expression. Something happened in your home, I wonder if you were injured. Gu Huan looked at the layers of reporters, policemen, and medical staff surrounding the outside, and finally realized how popular the admiral was once said to be in the original book. He shook his head lightly. With a paralyzed face, no surprise could be seen on his face at this time, and he replied calmly. No. To be exact, he didn't suffer any injuries except that his arm was riddled with holes from his own piercing. Seeing that Gu Huan was not injured, Wu Dai was more than half relieved. They all knew how strong the security measures in the general's mansion were. If there is an enemy that can destroy the general's mansion like this, the entire Jialan Star can sound the air defense alarm. Fortunately, the general was fine. After Wu Dai knew that the general was fine, he became concerned about who caused all this, and he assured Gu Huan with righteous indignation. Who destroys your mansion? It's really ulterior motives. Don't worry, we will definitely catch the murderer and punish him with the most severe punishment. Gu Huan couldn't let go. In order to avoid being imprisoned by this group of passionate fans, he frowned slightly and confessed the truth. It's me. Wu Dai was about to direct the police to search. When he heard such a sentence suddenly, he felt a little silly. How is this possible? If this level of destruction was not caused by the Zerg invasion, then it must have been caused by some high-risk weapon. Looking at the tragic situation behind Gu Huan, Wu Dai felt that it must be one of these two reasons. However, the young general just repeated it in his cold but charming voice, and Uda felt that he seemed to be hallucinating a helpless emotion. It's me. I looked at General Gu's expression, as if he was asking if you have anything to do? I made a meal and caught fire, why are you all here? The sisters upstairs have already described it quite accurately. I looked back at the good opportunity repeatedly. Just when the general came out, I actually saw a trace of the general's innocence and bewilderment. I may be lame. You still have time to look at General Gu's expression. I'm already fascinated just by looking at her face. My mother. How can there be such a strong and handsome alpha? I can't control my heat just looking at his face. Chicken coop warning. It's not just an omega. The general's beauty has surpassed his gender. I'm an alpha, but I just want his body. I'm mean. It's useless to have an idea. Have you ever fought a general? Can you mark the general on the bed? Be realistic, young man. I don't know what kind of mess was chatted on the internet. After the police, doctors, and reporters left, soldiers from Gu Huan's army also arrived at the scene one after another. "General!" The adjutant walked behind Gu Huan and called Gu Huan to stop him. Seeing the cold eyes that were cast on him immediately, the adjutant flinched. As an adjutant, he shouldn't have questioned the officer, but he still couldn't help asking. "Are you hiding something?" The police did not have the right to search the general's mansion, so they only listened to the general's statement. After knowing that the prisoner was General Gu himself, and that General Gu really didn't use any high-risk weapons, but just practiced mental power, he left in a daze and shock. But people with high-level spiritual power like them are different. He knows in his heart that the house can be turned into such a miserable state, and it is definitely not caused by mental power practice. It's also beyond practice. Because if the general is indeed practicing, he must be training in a special mental power training room, and the security of that place must be stronger than that of an ordinary room in the general's mansion. How could it be destroyed like this? Looking at the black short-haired brother in military uniform beside him, Gu Huan suddenly remembered. He seems to have asked this person to write an inspection yesterday. His name seems to be Yu Yang. Seeing that Gu Huan did not speak for a long time and looked at him silently, Yu Yang became more and more sure of his guess. Psychological riots are no small matter. General. In this world, people with stronger mental power are more likely to cause mental riots. Gu Huan has always been famous for his outstanding mental power in the army, and his mental power can reach SS level, which is simply a group with a high incidence of mental illness. Work can be put aside first, or the mental state is the most important. Here. Gu Huan suddenly had a new idea in his mind. If he left directly, Uncle Huang would definitely not easily give up such a powerful chess piece of his own, but if he retreated from his position before the prince came back because of his mental condition, stay away from here and escape to a place outside the star field of the Imperial Alliance. Free Starfield, wouldn't it be possible to leave this plot forever? I will think about it. Yu Yang originally wanted to persuade him again, but suddenly he was taken aback when he heard the answer he thought he would not hear. Said the general. Will he consider it? Not long after Gu Huan left, the general's mansion, which was protected by security shielding devices and the robot was about to clean up the scene, was surrounded by another group of people. The golden protective net that only a few people in the empire had the authority to open was easily opened. A tall alpha with three-dimensional facial features walked slowly to the front of the general's mansion. His eyes were deep, blue like the deep sea, revealing arcs of insight into everything. The mandibular line, the whole body is astonishing, like the sun, it is scorching and attractive to him. The only thing that is a little hazy is his arm, which is bandaged at this time, and seems to be injured. The people behind him poured into the general's mansion the moment he stood at the door, and the general's mansion was quickly turned upside down. The blond man in military boots followed the crowd, stepped on the lens of the ruins, stopped suddenly, lowered his head, seemed to be attracted by something, bent down, and picked up the fallen things on the ground with his other uninjured hand up. It's a syringe. Through white gloves, rubbing the wet liquid on the outer wall of the syringe, the blond man narrowed his eyes slightly. Just listen to the reactions of the people around you. Your Highness, evidence has been found that General Gu Huan is indeed in contact with Duke Chu Fengyuan. Gu Huan, who didn't know that his home had been searched all over, started his resignation preparations without hesitation. The original owner's legion was built around himself. Gu Huan also didn't want to destroy other people's troops in his own hands in order to save his life, at least arrange everything and give an explanation to the military department, so that he can leave. Before traveling to the Western fantasy world, he was a descendant of a soldier. Although he didn't really join the army because he was sitting in a wheelchair because of his leg problems, he had also read a lot of books on this subject, plus what the original owner had learned in the past. Gu Huan felt that he learned more about the military than before. But the more he knew about the original owner's army, the more Gu Huan felt that it was a pity that such an army was in the hands of an undercover agent. As a mech raid force on the battlefield. Although the original owner's regiment only had 2,500 members, all of these 2,500 members were elites with elemental abilities and the ability to manipulate mechs. On the battlefield, they should have been a dedicated support unit, appearing wherever they were needed. However, the original owner has made no achievements in terms of support, and his ability in the aspect of grabbing credit is a must. Regardless of actual support, as long as the report is well written, he can get outstanding merit. So the youngest general in history, or rather, the most credit-grabbing general in history, has a high score in public opinion surveys, but he is not very popular among the top ranks of the Legion. In order to make an explanation and not leave any regrets, Gu Huan decided to replan the raid group. Just as he was writing the plan, the optical brain on the table suddenly lit up. Xiaoling, what's the matter? Your Excellency the Duke invites you to meet. Gu Huan's artificial intelligence Xiaoling replied without any emotion. Hearing this news, Gu Huan paused his pen slightly. I see. The Duke, he really came to find himself. After tidying up in the temporary hotel, Gu Huan, surrounded by guards, boarded the interstellar top spaceship and flew directly to the capital star. The mansion of Duke Chu Fengyuan occupies the most beautiful place in the capital, and the whole design is full of high-tech. The special ground material that can be seen reflects the golden energy stone on the top, and the smooth special glass on both sides is not only luxurious, because it is impossible to have this kind of glass that is usually only found in the palace. The glass material is used in an entire channel. Gu Huan asked 2 rows of guards around him to guard the door, and walked into the Duke's gate alone. After a few corners, a 3-meter-high metal gate opened wide. Gu Huan walked in, but before he saw anyone, he heard a slightly rapid panting and the loud sound of the bed turning. His eyebrows twitched, and he lowered his head directly, without looking at the bed curtain over there. There was a thin sound. Gu Huan waited patiently for another moment, until he felt someone walking in front of him, then slowly raised his head. Said humbly, Your Excellency the Duke. In front of him was a man with long straight golden hair. The long straight golden hair fell lightly on the side of his ears like streamers, and his face, which had been stained with the traces of time, still looked handsome. He was only wearing a golden bathrobe. Standing in front of him, the curve of the corner of his mouth was as perfect as a formula. You came earlier than I thought, Huan. Listening to the gentle voice like a real mentor and helpful friend. Gu Huan opened the corner of his mouth expressionlessly. He didn't know whether he should say some polite words to ease the embarrassing situation when he happened to be by someone else. In the original text, this is how the private life of the Duke is described. Because the Duke is so inferior to his beta status that he has become perverted, he especially likes to tune/teach some strong alphas, making them bend over and suffer. Gu Huan happened to come early, and just bumped into him. Fortunately, I didn't smell any special pheromone, probably because, what special effect does that golden bed curtain have? I've heard about the prince's disappearance, and you've done a good job this time. The Duke slowly approached Gu Huan. Before Gu Huan could speak, he moved closer to Gu Huan, took off the white gloves on his hands, exposed his slender fingers, lightly covered Gu Huan's jaw, and lifted it up. Asked in a very cold voice. Why didn't I hear directly about his death? The place where the jaw is touched is very awkward. Gu Huan clenched his fists indiscriminately, a pair of indifferent platinum gold eyes stared directly at Chu Fengyuan's ice blue eyes. I want to kill him. But the black hole was right in front of me at the time. If I didn't let go, I might not be able to get rid of the black hole's gravity. Xian Fengyuan turned his head slightly, as if he was weighing the authenticity of Gu Huan's words. Gu Huan was not guilty at all. Because he felt that the original owner must have thought so. Xian Fengyuan could feel that Gu Huan was not lying to him, and his eyes softened instantly. I saw the news yesterday. Is the medicine almost out of control? Gu Huan's heart skipped a beat. The Duke did know. The Duke seemed to understand something without hearing his words, and then showed a more complicated expression. He reached out and stroked Gu Huan's cheek. Sigh. If only I could tag you. Although he is only a beta, he has a body as tall as an alpha, and his every move is like an emperor who has already controlled the entire situation, making it impossible to ignore his power. The above is the original description. Gu Huan's body also tensed up completely, but it wasn't because of the opponent's power. It's because he was scared by this sentence. He didn't know whether he liked men or women, but he was definitely not a shy M. Not interested in NP either. I don't even want to be one of the many male alpha bed partners. Fortunately, the Duke did not let him go behind the secretive and interesting curtain, but sent him into an aircraft with strong anti-reconnaissance capabilities. There are all kinds of inspection instruments inside, and a doctor is waiting for him. When he saw the doctor, he felt familiar. Gu Huan attributed the inexplicable sense of familiarity to that memory that the original owner didn't want to recall. Although I can't recall it, it is very likely that they have intersected before. Following the doctor's instructions, he took off his upper body clothes, underwent various examinations, and was drained of half a tube of blood. Gu Huan pulled his collar, half sat on the hospital bed, and asked, "Doctor, how is my condition?" The doctor looked at the test results in the holographic projection with a solemn expression. After a while, he squeezed his chin, then shook his head again, turned around and said to Gu Huan, "Your situation is already very dangerous." "I know." Gu Huan nodded. Smoking/drugs are harmful to health. This slogan is everywhere in the last world. The omega inhibitor is close to failure. If it really reaches the point of failure, your mental power may riot again with the emotional instability during the estrus period. At that time, it is not certain whether you can survive. Is it so dangerous? Gu Huan thoughtfully, and suddenly blinked lightly. And many more. What are omega inhibitors? With a frown, Gu Huan leaned forward, "Doctor, I may have lost part of my memory due to my mental state. Can you tell me what happened to me again? Why does he need to use omega inhibitors for an alpha?" The doctor showed a surprised expression at first, but seeing that Gu Huan's expression did not seem to be fake, he told Gu Huan about his current situation. "You don't remember that you are an omega. You installed a pheromone reversal device in your body a long time ago. He will convert the omega pheromone you emit into the scent of alpha pheromone, and then emit it. You even used this camouflage device to escape from the army. An examination. No one can directly sense the smell of your omega pheromones except those who completely tag you. They will treat you as a real alpha. Omega naturally needs to have with alpha. If you enter estrus but don't want to have with alpha, you need to use inhibitors to suppress it. However, long-term use of inhibitors will cause the body's tolerance, receptors will be upregulated, not only the effect of the drug will be weakened, the condition of the omega itself will also be more serious than before the injection. You are now 30 years old, and you have completely missed the normal marked age of omega. Although the lifespan of human beings has been extended to 200 years, the estrus period of omega in this world is still counted from the age of 18. The survival rate of unmarked omega over 30 years old is extremely low. I just conducted an in vitro experiment using your cells and it has been confirmed that the omega pheromone inhibitor can only be used once again. The doctor pointed to the report and said, "The marked omega may only have one estrus period a year, but the unmarked omega has a shorter and shorter estrus interval, and the doctor can't say when Gu Huan will face the situation of pheromone failure. With all due respect, if you don't fully mark with a mature alpha, you will probably die in the next estrus mania, because your mental strength and physical fitness are too strong," the doctor said helplessly. No matter how frail an omega is, it might just scratch the bed sheet. Gu Huan's frenzied energy probably could tear down half a planet. He should have already realized something. Gu Huan's mouth twitched. The house has been demolished, you told me it was just for sex? Hearing the doctor's order and taking away the spare inhibitor, Gu Huan was in a daze after leaving the private hospital in the Duke's mansion. It turns out that my biggest survival challenge is not fighting wits with the prince and the emperor's uncle, but himself. He's not an alpha but an omega, and he has a really terrible estrus. Because the original owner's memory is incomplete, when he read the novel, the reasons for the original owner's betrayal were not explained in detail. He was puzzled at first why the admiral betrayed the prince and transferred to the emperor's uncle. He thought it was the author's forced setting. After all, it is not a coincidence that the original owner and the prince became friends. The original owner was an orphan adopted by the current marshal of the empire, and the marshal's grandson is the current prince. Because of the old marshal's relationship, he and the Prince Choose England became friends. Friend. He never understood, since he was the child adopted by the old marshal and also a friend of the prince, how could the prince/son/party, who was a certainty of the original owner, be so reluctant to go to the emperor's uncle and take the detour that Chu Fengyuan took? Now Gu Huan finally understood. The ambitious original owner hated his own secondary sexual characteristics after the differentiation of the secondary sexual characteristics, and was unwilling to be marked by others. An omega that has not been fully marked by others is like a timed/exploded omega in an army full of alphas. Well, if he reveals that he's an omega, he won't be able to stay in the army anymore. So for the right in front of him, he can only risk following those who can help him illegally. The emperor's uncle is also a talent, and he was able to perform that kind of operation on the original owner. After seeing the doctor, he went back to find the Duke, and fully expressed to the Duke that he wanted to retire. Although the other party regretted it, he unexpectedly agreed to his request to leave. Regardless of whether he was really so talkative or not, the Duke seemed to have no intention of killing him for the time being, and that was enough. Lowering his eyelashes slightly, Gu Huan asked quietly. Xiaoling, has my resignation letter been sent to the military department? Sent successfully. Very good. Regardless of whether he is an omega or not, it is always right to escape from this story first. After sending the resignation letter, Gu Huan's work became more and more busy, so he stopped staying in the hotel and moved directly into the office of the Jialan military region to continue to improve the planning of this army. He not only designed a complete training plan for the soldiers, but also watched them practice. Formation, by the way, let the captain lead the team to practice. That level of seriousness made the senior officers in the army aware of something abnormal. Finally one afternoon, the adjutants and captains rushed to Gu Huan's office. Jialan military region. The elevator floating in the center was working continuously, and the soldiers in black military uniforms came and went with stern faces, less of the unrestrained appearance at the banquet, and more of a firm and chilling aura. In the clouds above the large and small training rooms is the office of the most senior general of this army. The exterior wall of the office is shaped like a golden hollow bird's nest. The metal that makes up the bird's nest is very special. It can flow. When it comes to attacks, its ductility is absolutely amazing, and it can be hardened in an instant, indestructible and invulnerable. A few minutes before AI notified that someone wanted to see him, Gu Huan was taking a nap on the table. At this moment, he was sitting upright, his inorganic golden eyes were still a little bit sleepy, looking a little hazy, but still surrounded by a deserted temperament. Are you here for an inspection? Hearing the general's question, Yueyang, who rushed in a hurry, fell forward suddenly, and was punctured like a big balloon, deflated. This. Gu Huan looked at him without answering and then glanced at the two people standing behind him. Yueyang's character is frizzy and straightforward, so if he has any thoughts, he will definitely not be able to sit still, but why are the always cold Captain Mo Xiao and the famous calm Captain Keppel here? Gu Huan felt a little headache. Mo Xiao is a female alpha with flaming red hair. Her personality and her hair color are just two extremes, and she speaks very little. Seeing Gu Huan looking over, she gave a military salute expressionlessly, standing in a standard posture. General. Just leave that kind of matter to the military disciplinary office. It's just an inspection, and you don't need to be responsible for it yourself. We didn't come here today for this matter. Gu Huan squeezed the center of his brows, knowing that Mo Xiao was here, so he couldn't get away with it. Sure enough, Mo Xiao quickly got to the point. We just want to know how bad your current situation has become. Everyone is rumored that you are going to step down. Gu Huan frowned slightly. The situation has gotten so bad, that the lack of an alpha is about to die. Can you say that? Gu Huan's silent appearance made the other three acquiesce in their guesses. Keppel pressed his lips together, blushing, and took a step forward, giving a military salute. I'm very sorry, but I must report that I have been prejudiced against you before. Thinking that you are an airborne-related household, and we are just actors who exist to let you make military achievements. The commando has no value of existence, it just goes wherever it can make meritorious service. In fact, you are definitely not prejudiced. Before, I didn't understand the meaning of our existence. To fight an interstellar pirate fleet, cannons are more useful than us mecha fighters. Keppel said excitedly. But now I think our presence is essential. If the army has to face the Zerg during the bug swarm, the mech team we formed can better avoid the Zerg's induction and deal with the Zerg better than large warships. It must be the best configuration to deal with that situation. The meaning of our raid army is to fight against the Zerg. The Zerg in Keppel's mouth is the main enemy of this interstellar human. In the solar system where the Imperial Alliance is located, there was originally only human beings as an intelligent race. Later, for unknown reasons, a large number of Zerg races suddenly appeared. They plundered human energy and gradually grew stronger, threatening the safety of human beings at all times. After research on the growth habits of the Zerg by human experts, the Zerg is divided into two situations, the incubation period and the insect infestation period. The Zerg in the incubation period is solitary, because it swallows a large number of energy stones, moves slowly, and is easy to be killed by humans. The insect in the influx period Zergs are strong, they appear in groups, and they move quickly. Every time they appear, they will cause heavy casualties to humans. The planetary protection mechanism will send an evacuation warning during the insect tide period, open the protective cover, and resist the Zergs from entering the planet inhabited by humans. However, this strategy is not safe. In the original text, the Emperor's uncle used technological means to usurp the throne to trigger a man-made bug swarm. The Star Empire Alliance has been at ease for many years because of the existence of the protective shield. That sudden bug swarm caught the Empire by surprise. If it wasn't for the protagonist's supernatural mecha fighting talent and the blessing of the Halo, the Empire would have ended long ago. If Gu Huan hadn't read the novel and could foresee the danger in the future, and felt that it was a pity that the army was destroyed, he would not have written a plan for rectification at this time. When Keppel said, the two people next to him kept nodding in agreement. Our army cannot do without you. Colonel Keppel. There was a cold light in Gu Huan's eyes. You should understand that an army that cannot function without one person is destined to be a bad army. Keppel clenched his fingers. The other two were also silent. Gu Huan was very relieved that they wanted to keep him, at least his hard work during this time was not in vain, but Gu Huan felt that they didn't need to be so worried at all, because he had just submitted the most perfect plan he could think of to the military department. If they really like their plan, then he believes that no matter who gets the plan, he can continue to complete his ideas. Gu Huan felt that it didn't matter whether he existed or not, but he forgot that no matter how he removed the necessity of his existence from this plan, he wrote the plan. Capital Star Corps did such an excellent battle plan coincide with your thoughts. When the Marshal was reading the plan, Chu Xinglan remained expressionless and silent. The sharp-edged silhouette was full of masculine strength and sharpness with a hint of unruliness. His blue eyes turned slightly, and he opened his lips in response. Yes. He told me that he wanted to resign from the position of regimental commander. I don't know if I should approve him. Seeing him nod, old Marshal Gu Zihe shook his head lightly again. Of course he didn't want Gu Huan to leave. In his eyes, Gu Huan was a new star that had just shone its light, and it was time to shine. It's a pity to leave now. Although he is not his own grandson, he was the one who brought Gu Huan back. Gu Huan has always called him teacher, and he has always regarded Gu Huan as his successor. Chu Xinglan next to him knew that his grandfather was waiting for his opinion, so he suggested. I heard that he had a small-scale mental violence in his mansion. With his character who cares so much about merit, he shouldn't make fun of his grades. He should really need to rest for a while. He not only heard about it, but also visited it on the spot. But Chu Xinglan suddenly didn't want to tell the old marshal about this kind of thing. The old marshal shook his head and sighed. You still know him best, Xinglan? Chu Xinglan was a little silent about this, and spoke after a while. If you don't want Gu Huan to resign, you can let him rest for a while. Maybe his mental strength will improve and he will change his mind. The old marshal's eyes lit up. Good idea, whoever said that there is a problem with mental strength has to leave the job, you can take a break for a while and come back. After sorting out the entangled matters, the old marshal grabbed Chu Xinglan and asked about his physical condition. Before leaving, Chu Xinglan turned his head, as if he suddenly remembered something. Grandpa, I haven't told anyone about the news that I came back alive this time. I hope you can hide it for me. Certainly. After getting an affirmative answer, Chu Xinglan nodded slightly, turned and left the old marshal's office. As if he was thinking about something, he untied the bandage on his arm round and round until he pulled the bandage off, revealing trying to shake the smooth forearm. He turned his head lightly, and gave instructions to the prince's special guards around him in a deep voice. Monitor General Gu Huan's subsequent actions, I want to know all the details. Yes, Your Highness. Gu Huan soon got a reply from the military. It's just that the result was completely different from what he had imagined. Although Keppel was assigned the position of commander of the general, he did not let him resign. Instead, he was given a 3-month vacation, hoping that he could change the situation. Idea. Gu Huan has already made up his mind to leave. Resignation or vacation does not matter, it can only be said that such a result made him have to consider more complicated ways to escape the story. Just as he was about to escape the plan, the little butterfly flapped its wings. The first military academy, the top wealthy family in the military academy. On the day before the military training, the freshmen who were registering received another optical brain message. From the time I entered the military academy, I am willing to accept all training and obey the orders of the commander, regardless of life or death. Do you need to take an oath for this kind of thing? Of course it is necessary. That's pretty cool too. We'll have to make a video to prove it. Ha 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 ha, it's really fun. Do you know who the chief instructor is here? Gu Huan. 9 out of 10 military academies say the same thing, but which one is the real Gu Huan? Don't even think about it. The students of the first military academy were wearing all white military uniforms, and they seemed to be full of energy. They chatted about the people who might appear in today's freshman ceremony, discussed the beautiful Omega they liked, and then pretended assuming that he is already an adult, he walked into the freshman ceremony venue. As more and more people sat in the hall, the whispering voices of the students gradually subsided, and they all stared at the stage intently, with round and bright eyes. The holographic curtain opened. The person they were expecting did not appear, and standing there was an old man with a red face. The headmaster of the first military academy, Atli. His speech, like every old man who is old and likes to talk a little more about his life, is long and boring. Not even his playful beard can attract the attention of these brats. After outstanding students and outstanding graduates gave speeches one by one, everyone gave up hope that the general would appear. When everyone was full of disappointment, someone suddenly exclaimed, "Everyone! Look outside!" The lecture hall of the First Military Academy is surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows more than 10 meters high, so you can see the outside scenery as soon as you turn your head. They had never seen so many spaceships. The students in the hall were leaning against the glass one by one, looking out with their heads pressed against each other. If it weren't for the special dust removal device on the glass itself, their clean white school uniforms might have to be used to clean the glass. The principal, who was still giving a speech just now, was waiting outside at some point. Countless military mechas were parked outside. A man stepped out from behind the open hatch. His expression was indifferent, and his light-colored thin lips were slightly pursed with blood, but he still looked very pale. The pure black military uniform clings to his thin body curves, making his waist look straight and his legs slender. Although his height is not prominent among alphas, it just sets off all the other alphas around him. The students, mouths wide enough to swallow a pebble, slapped the glass excitedly. Artificial intelligence has been reminding students to calm down through the cold mechanical sound. But nothing works. Really, it's true, the media didn't lie to us. It's really an admiral. The admiral is coming. The sound insulation system in the hall is indeed very good. They are making a lot of noise, but the outside is still calm. The principal who greeted Gu Huan was the first to go up and shook hands. "Admiral, I am very happy that you can choose our school." After the live broadcast of the destruction of the general's mansion was reported, the reputation of Gu Huan, the youngest general in history, became more and more famous. Unintentionally inserting willows and willows into shades. When he was most popular, it happened to be the peak period of military academy enrollment. Many students filled in the military academy volunteers on the grounds that they wanted to become General Gu Huan's subordinates, and even increased the rate of joining the army for a while. This phenomenon triggered military academies in various galaxies. Focus on. In order to promote their own school, and to attract better students, the military academies in various galaxies frantically win over the military department, hoping that they will let Gu Huan come to their school as the chief instructor. But only their number one military academy invited Gu Huan over. Thinking of this, the headmaster couldn't help but raise his chin a little. Who else can do this kind of thing? Of course only their first military academy. "You are too kind," Gu Huan said calmly. His expression was much warmer than usual. Compared with the principal's simple happiness, he thought much more. What he is doing now has never happened in the original novel. In the original article, the bombing of the general's house was suppressed by Gu Huan himself before it was reported, so it did not cause such a wide discussion, and of course he was not invited by the first military academy. It is impossible to agree, because the original owner cannot accept such a meaningless and ineffective job, and he has not yet taken a vacation and has no time to come. However, he agreed. In order to stay away from this story, he has already drawn up a suspended animation route that is very suitable for interstellar escape through Xiaoling's calculations. But the interstellar jump function of the spacecraft needs to use wormholes. The closest and safest wormhole he has found so far is near a remote planet. He did not resign, and a lieutenant general like the original owner needs the approval of the military department to travel to any landmark that has not passed the safety inspection. He cannot go out at will. He originally wanted to sneak to that planet, but he did not expect the first military academy to go to military training the planet that happens to be that remote planet. Such a reasonable thing is really waiting for him, of course he will not refuse. Principal Atli didn't know what Gu Huan was thinking. He looked at this young talent with a smile on his face, and expressed high expectations for him. The children who returned to the military academy this time are all good children. This time the military training should be compared to training them according to the standards of your army. Before Gu Huan could speak, Yu Yang, who was standing next to Gu Huan, couldn't stand any more. What? Train them to their standards? After the military training is over, are they still alive to study at school? No wonder the general had to include a life and death statement in their admission notice in advance. Those stupid kids didn't even know that they were being sold and they were still having fun there. Fortunately, he is not a student of this year's #1 military academy. Yang silently sweated in his heart for those students who were still in the stage of excitement. Gu Huan said. I will. The principal patted Gu Huan on the shoulder, and left Pingdi very relieved. After the principal left, Gu Huan glanced in the direction of the hall and was frightened for a moment. Is there a zombie virus over there? Nose and eyes squeezed against the window. Noticing that the admiral was looking over here, the student who was leaning against the window immediately let his body leave the glass, rushed back to his seat and sat neatly. The movement was so fast that it was suspected that a stampede might occur. The extent of the accident. Seeing all this, Yang stood next to Gu Huan and couldn't help chuckling. Why do these children look so much like high school students peeking at the school grass? Gu Huan glanced at him sideways. Yang immediately restrained his expression, and coughed lightly and seriously. Gu Huan didn't stay outside the auditorium. He directly stepped on the aircraft prepared for him by the school, flew to the place where the principal gave a speech, and gave a brief self-introduction. When he stood on it, he accidentally saw the two protagonists sitting in the first and second rows below. They may be the only problems that bother him after he comes to this school. The protagonists in the novel happen to be freshmen at the first military academy. The protagonist in the original novel is a real grassroots. Although he was born in a humble background, he became the marshal of the empire by virtue of his talent and courage. Because the prince of the empire died in the insect swarm, in order to live up to the prince's entrustment, he withered in the royal family. Under the circumstances, he became the new emperor of the empire by relying on his personal reputation. However, this man who was arranged by the author as a Dashuang article route has just started a love story at this time, and is going to meet the future queen at school, that is, the Omega sitting in the back row of him. Gu Huan feels that he has not yet. If you provoke them, you shouldn't be hated by these two people like in the original text. But why did these two people keep staring at him with such horrifyingly focused eyes? Gu Huan couldn't figure it out, but he didn't have time to think about it. He directly opened the video material he made and started to give a speech. The light in the hall dimmed all of a sudden, and all the spotlights shone on a man with black hair. The illusory and hazy light and shadow blurred his eyebrows and eyes, making him almost shockingly beautiful, as if he himself was emitting light. What kind of fairy face value? The holographic live broadcast is not as good looking as I am. From the beginning of the general's speech, the students below held their breath for fear of missing every syllable. The speed of the general's speech was not fast, and every sound carried his unique cold and alienated texture, telling the success and failure of the past at the time. He didn't make any expressions of grief or joy, but suppressed the depth that many students had never felt. A blond man watching the scene opened a bottle of tequila, leaned against the sofa, looked at the picture in the hall, and stared at the black-haired man in the holographic picture. Gu Huan continued his speech without noticing. The experience he talked about was the processed experience of the original owner, but he also had his own true feelings. In the last life, he was dressed as a half-elf, because he was a cursed race, and he was hunted down by humans or elves every day. And finally organized a mercenary group. The blood he had seen was no less than that of a real general. It's just that his tone was as cold as ever, without any ups and downs. Whether your ending is brilliant in the end or becomes a number in the statistics of mortality has nothing to do with me. But those who are delusional about being able to get a military rank and become an officer after graduating here, I can't let you survive the military training. Garbage should stay where garbage should be. The above is all I have to say. Gu Huan stopped talking. There was still no sound below. Gu Huan frowned slightly. What he said, was it bad? Of course not. After a deathly silence, there was applause that overturned the roof. This is a speech recorded in the history of the school. Who else can use such a calm tone as usual to make every student's blood boil? The slender fingers loosened from the microphone, and everyone under the stage lit up. The students below hadn't calmed down yet, and the applause was thunderous, and the applause didn't stop until Yu Yang followed on the stage. Yu Yang touched his head in embarrassment. It is also your senior, your superior, why do you think I am not emotional? This is too discriminatory. Personality cult is a must. Students, do you have anything else you want to ask? If not, we will go to the military training place on the warship. Gu Huan stood there waiting to ask questions. He saw the protagonist in the first row raised his hand high, and just wanted to stop Yu Yang from calling the people in the first row, when he heard Yu Yang point him up. Gu Huan. Nai Chuan stood up amidst the envious and jealous expressions of thousands of people. Admiral. I am your loyal book fan, the one who sent you a letter before. Gu Huan frowned. The original Gu Huan liked to hear praises from others, so he wrote a lot of autobiographies and published a lot of star fields, but the protagonist of the novel is a fan of the original owner? How could he not know about this? My anonymity is X. Anonymous X. Gu Huan suddenly remembered that before he crossed over, the original owner had indeed received such a letter. The owner of the letter wrote some thoughts about the Zerg issue and worries about the future. The occurrence of the bug swarm itself refused to admit the possibility of a bug swarm outbreak, so it sent back a letter of criticism in harsh terms. The letter of criticism was buried under the rubble, and was later collected by the robot. After it was handed over to him, he rewrote a letter of approval and sent it back. If he replied according to the letter sent by the original owner to the protagonist, Gu Huan suddenly understood why the protagonist hated the original owner so much. Yet. Gu Huan nodded lightly, I remember you. Nai Chuan's face turned red suddenly, and everyone around looked at Nai Chuan with envious eyes. He was actually remembered by the general. He bowed heavily in the direction of Gu Huan. I have no problem, I just want to say that you are the first person who agrees with me. So I applied for this military academy for you. I hope that one day, I can also shine under your hands. The main character is going after a villain? As if Gu Huan heard a joke, he couldn't help evoking a slightly invisible arc, and said in a low voice. Wish you success. The audience in the audience didn't know what the people on the stage were thinking, but the general who had been keeping his face cold all the time suddenly raised the corners of his lips slightly involuntarily. His iceberg-melting smile made the scene chaotic for a while. At the same time, the person on the other end of the video also saw the smile, rubbed his fingers slightly, and pressed the communication button. The person controlling the flying camera metal ball in the corner raised his hand with a surprised expression on his face after hearing the order through the special information flow channel. Because Gu Huan was so popular, he raised his hand several times, but several people failed to point him out. Just when he thought he had no hope of being selected, he finally waited for the of luck to come to him. Against the envious eyes of the audience, he wiped the cold sweat from his brow. I've always heard that you have a good relationship with the prince. How do you think about the disappearance of the prince? Yu Yang heard someone asking such a question, and almost wanted to ask him to sit down. This is the opening ceremony, so it's okay to make the Q&A session the same as the fan meeting just now. Why do people ask such questions that are out of bounds with the general? Although the question was a bit off topic, Gu Huan still answered the other party's question. He'll be back. General Gu is worthy of being a good friend of the prince, and he really trusts him. Chu Xinglan stared at the screen, seeing Gu Huan so confidently saying that he would definitely come back. He smiled inexplicably, and asked his internal response at the ceremony to ask a question. What do you think of His Royal Highness? Gu Huan pursed his lips, and blurted out an answer that was always in his heart. He is hope. He didn't lie, he took the crown prince as if the hope was true. After reading the novel, he knew that if there was no royal family who firmly led the entire interstellar to overcome difficulties during the bug tide period, the result would definitely be worse. But Gu Huan hid the second half of the sentence. He is also a disaster. Whoever makes himself a cannon fodder now is the prince cannon fodder, and he can always hide if he can't provoke him. Gu Huan thought to himself. Hope. Biting the mouth of the wine bottle with his teeth, the tall alpha leaned back, drank the spirits in the bottle, and licked his lips. Under the starry sky, the short golden hair was on the edge of the semi-dark shadow, like a golden-haired lion crouching in the dark, with its eyes firmly locked on its prey, its eyes suppressed with obscurity. It's really acting like that. Where is the planet he went to? Planet Ha 654. The students were assigned to the spaceship parked in Pingdi in turn according to their class. The spaceship flew on the road for a few days before finally reaching the remote planet. Just after landing, Gu Huan didn't give them any time to breathe, and went directly to one of the training plans. These training plans are all copied from the training subjects of Gu Huanzheo's special forces in the previous world. It only takes half a day to train these arrogant alphas to the devil's intensity that they can't even climb up. The students of the first military academy are used to the comfortable training in the pressure room, and in Gu Huan's eyes, they are no different from the flowers in the greenhouse. This remote planet, because of the scarcity of energy, has a harsh climate, variable gravity, and always ice and snow, which seems to be very suitable for training. In this extreme environment, the students had to conduct evasion training under the hail of bullets from the instructors brought by Gu Huan. As the chief instructor, Gu Huan doesn't need to go down to train them himself, he just needs to stand and sit in the control room of the warship and watch them train. Looking at the complaining students on the monitoring screen, Yueyang said helplessly. My Lord General, if you let the optical network reporters know that you trained this group of heaven's favored children, I'm afraid, your reputation will be damaged. Gu Huan rested his chin on his fingers, looked at the students in the video, and didn't care much about it. Anyway, when the prince comes back, the name Gu Huan will sooner or later become the name of a death row prisoner, and he will have already gone far away by then. Rather than worrying about reputation, it's better to take responsibility for these little before leaving. After all, except for the two protagonists who enrolled in this military academy, most of them were cannon fodder who died in the insect swarm. Gu Huan felt that he still felt a little sympathetic towards these cannon fodder. I want them to have some ability to protect themselves against the Zerg alone. They may not be able to understand your painstaking efforts. Yueyang shook his head disapprovingly. He has also been an instructor, and it is not clear that the current students are not as good as the previous one. Prefers to hide in a protective cover. Of course, if you tell them directly that you trained these to fight against the Zerg during the bug tide period, they might look at you like an idiot. Gu Huan didn't answer, but when he saw a certain picture, he suddenly frowned. In the surveillance video, a man with the brim of his hat extremely low appeared in front of the steps of the warship. The man was tall and fit the military uniform very well, but he wore the military uniform too unruly, with the collar of his white shirt fully unbuttoned. He was wearing it, and his black coat was also wide open. Why does it look so familiar? Yueyang also found him. General. Do you need to send someone up to ask who he is? Yueyang carefully identified the military rank on the opponent's shoulder, and took a breath in disbelief. General, this turned out to be a brigadier general. I'll go down myself. Because Gu Huan is only here for military training, not for war, the other captains are not here, and the highest-ranking Yueyang here besides him is only a lieutenant colonel. It's more polite for him to meet. I'll go too. Yueyang was very active, watching the boring training of students could no longer satisfy his jumping heart. Need not. Gu Huan gestured to the guards standing guard in the monitoring room. He straddled his long legs and left the seat, took the people who followed him, and then turned around and gave instructions. You look at the students. Hearing that he couldn't keep up, Yueyang immediately withered half, and replied aggrievedly. Yes, General. He walked off the spaceship with dozens of heavily armed soldiers behind him. Seeing the exorbitant height of the opponent, Gu Huan didn't go too close, and stopped when he was 3 meters away from the opponent, so as not to expose his shortcomings. "I'm the Imperial Star Alliance Army, Admiral Gu Huan, and I'm on a military training mission. I don't know why Your Excellency is here." Gu Huan's question was very ordinary, and his tone was colder than usual, even to the point of being unusually cold. He was indeed different from usual. At this distance, he couldn't help smelling the pheromone smell on the opponent's body. The pheromone mixed with the smell of agave made him extremely irritated, but that irritability was different from the feeling affected by the Omega last time. It was a feeling that made him afraid of the irritability caused by the involuntary fear and obedience in his heart. With a handsome and noble face slightly raised, Gu Huan pulled out his energy gun from his waist, pressed his slender and white fingers on the trigger, pointed at the other person, and looked directly into those deep blue eyes. He once again indifferently "Open your mouth. Don't make me ask again. Your Union soldier number. I'll give you time to count to 3. I have the right to deal with strangers who threaten the safety of students on the spot." Looking at his movements and expressions, it is estimated that no one will doubt the authenticity of this sentence. The person who was sizing up Gu Huan with his eyes finally restrained his eyes and raised his hands in surrender. "I am Brigadier General Chu Lin, soldier number 23241. Xiao Ling quickly inquired about the information said by the other party. After checking, the soldier's number is correct, and the other party's identity is Brigadier General Chu Lin, and the task is assigned, 1st Military Academy, Deputy Chief Instructor. Hearing the prompt sound of Guang Nao confirming his identity, the other party slightly raised the corners of his lips. "Hello, Admiral Gu Huan." Gu Huan pursed his lips. His eyes couldn't help passing by the burn scar that covered almost the entire right eye and forehead, and then looked at the other's jet black hair. He always felt something was very familiar, especially when he bumped into those dark blue eyes. The sense of familiarity became more and more obvious. Before waiting for Gu Huan to ask, seeing Gu Huan looking at him like this, the Brigadier General has already asked and answered himself. "Do you think I look like a prince? They all said that I look a lot like the prince. I once dreamed of being the prince's bodyguard and stand-in, but unfortunately, I was splashed with the corrosive liquid of the Zerg and ruined my face, so I couldn't make it. Unfortunately, I could have relied on face to eat." Gu Huan twitched the corners of his lips. Can the rank of Brigadier General on a remote planet be given away with phone bills? With only this little dream, how did he become a Brigadier General? Although he could see the unbelievable depth hidden under Gu Huan's calm face, the new Brigadier General still didn't feel ashamed. "I was seriously injured before, so I didn't have time to attend the opening ceremony. I just came here now. By the way, I still have a recommendation letter from the Marshal. If you still don't believe it, you can contact Marshal Gu." Gu Huan raised his eyebrows, and before he contacted the old Marshal, he just happened to receive a private message stream from the old Marshal, which was a video, to the effect that he hoped he could take care of this airborne soldier during his military academy. Someone who has the ability to forge the old Marshal's private account to send him messages should not exist yet. Because the information flow of these soldiers is directly reviewed by the parent artificial intelligence of the optical network, if there is any forgery, it will definitely be discovered. This person is really the Deputy Chief Instructor. Gu Huan was a little silent. He didn't want to get too close to this person. Because the pheromones on this person have too much influence on him. This is a feeling that he has never encountered before. He will unconsciously pay attention to each other's every move and be easily influenced by this person. He once heard the doctor say that there is a pheromone fit, and he doesn't need to go to the specific test. He can also feel that the pheromone fit between him and this person is absolutely extraordinary. Because he had never been so strange in the military region where there were so many alpha pheromones. After a long-distance confirmation with the old Marshal, Gu Huan suppressed his unsteady breathing, tried his best to control himself from ignoring the pheromone smell of the person in front of him, and said coldly, "Come with me." Gu Huan turned around quickly, with an air of repulsion around him, he turned and left very quickly. Chu Lin stared at the thin figure. Chuckled. The dark blue eyes gradually deepened. Under the black hair, due to the interference of the magnetic field, a little gold was briefly exposed. With an indifferent face on his face, Gu Huan took the newcomer Chu Lin for a walk around the training ground. Contrary to what Yueyang guessed, in fact, the students did not hate Gu Huan because of the excessive amount of training. On the contrary, they were very happy that Gu Huan appeared at their hardest time, because they hated the training plan more than the makers of the training plan implementer. When Gu Huan took people on a tour, the instructors who were hate in the hearts of the students and who were actually just taking the blame for Gu Huan stopped admonishing the students, stood at attention and saluted the young general. With the most respectful eyes, he cast some doubtful eyes on the tall alpha who didn't know his origin beside the admiral. As an alpha, if the pheromones are not intentionally released to threaten others, generally alphas cannot feel the pheromones of the alpha. Others are under a lot of pressure. Some instructors who originally wanted to show their faces in front of the general, after seeing the alpha behind Gu Huan, didn't dare to approach, and only dared to mutter in their hearts. "Who is this? Why don't you know me?" Fortunately, the information flow network within the military quickly announced the identity of this person. It turned out that he was the deputy chief instructor who hadn't shown up for a long time. Admiral Gu Huan and Admiral Chu Lin, the pairing of the two of them seems too complementary. It's like the opposite sides of ice and fire. The brigadier general looked a little rough and unruly domineering, and he always seemed to have an unstoppable enthusiasm like a heat wave. His eyebrows were deep and three-dimensional, his stature was tall and strong, and he was very imposing. On the other hand, Admiral Gu Huan was strict and abstinent, too deserted and even a little gloomy. His figure was already a little thin in alpha, but this comparison made him even more slender. If they weren't all alphas, it would be quite appropriate to live there. But this kind of complaints, the instructors only dare to slander in their hearts. Two alphas who are both so strong, if they can live, they are afraid that the world will be destroyed if they fight. Look at the lightsaber wielding in the student's hand. The person behind him stopped suddenly, and Gu Huan turned his head. Chu Lin was pulling out a sword handle from the machine next to it, holding it up in front of his eyes. The shining lightsaber emitted azure blue light. "I've heard that the general's swordsmanship is very powerful. Do you want to practice it with me? We probably don't have this kind of spare time." Gu Huan replied, his voice gradually weakened. He looked around. Unknowingly, the surroundings were surrounded by students, and even the venue was vacated for them. Under the expectant eyes of the students, Gu Huan drew a straight line from the corners of his lips, took off his military uniform coat, and neatly untied it. Unbuttoning a few buttons on his sleeve, he walked to the side of the machine, pulled out a sword handle, and unfolded the lightsaber with a buzz. Knuckle fingers gripped the hilt lightly. "Then, let's make a quick decision." Starting with the simplest duel etiquette, Gu Huan instantly turned into a black lightning bolt. His steps are elegant and quick, the waist lined by the military uniform decorated with belts is extremely slender, his handsome face is still expressionless, and he seems to be able to do a job with ease. The sword fell silently, and the sword pointed at the vital point. Compared with the swordsmanship that soldiers often learn, they are more like assassins and mercenaries. The tall body on the opposite side seemed to be born with a sense of oppressive aggression, and the scar across the entire face carried a dangerous temperament, but Gu Huan was not afraid at all, and he drew his sword quickly without leaving any room. Alpha, who wasn't serious at first, turned his expression serious, swept away the looseness before, raised his sword and turned from offense to defense. The two of them almost became two lights and shadows, only the sound of stabbing rubbing against each other could be heard when the lightsabers clashed, covered by the flying dust. People outside can't even see who won. Their physical fitness are above A. If the physical fitness does not reach A, it is impossible to catch up with their speed, because seeing their movements clearly requires excellent dynamic vision. With a bang, I don't know who fell to the ground. One is pressing the other, and the timid student has covered his eyes with his fingers. This is a real competition, not a fight, they are too serious. Could it be that there was a grudge before? Chu Lin pressed Gu Huan's hand holding the sword with one hand, and the lightsaber rested on Gu Huan's neck with his backhand, asking in a deep voice. Why did you stop all of a sudden? His chest was heaving up and down constantly, his eyelashes were wet with sweat and pierced into his eye sockets, Gu Huan's metallic eyes showed an inorganic cold light, and his voice, which was a little hoarse and more confusing because of the movement, explained without a trace of ups and downs. Continue, there will be danger. During the duel, the pheromones on the opponent's body became more and more intense, which made him feel very bad. He felt that he could not continue, lest it cause more serious consequences and advance the estrus period. Although he didn't want to admit defeat, he wasn't enjoying himself. The place on the wrist touched by the other party is still inexplicably hot. Gu Huan raised his eyes and bumped into those dark blue eyes, and expressed the current situation plainly. You win. Chu Lin or Chu Xinglan, of course, can see Gu Huan's unwillingness from such a close distance. When those golden eyes were filled with unwillingness to admit defeat, the fire beam inside instantly ignited Chu Xinglan, and the desire to conquer in his heart was like gradually ferments in the vast ocean-like eyes. Pretending to be another person approached Gu Huan because he found that he was curious about this person. It wasn't the first time someone had betrayed him like this. He had long thought that the emperor's uncle would put someone beside him, except for the fact that that person was Gu Huan, which made him very angry. He was not particularly surprised on the whole. He originally thought that when he came back this time, he could hide his strength and bide his time, silently observe Gu Huan, a spy, and obtain the emperor's uncle's information from him in reverse, and then pull out the emperor's uncle's chess piece after he returned completely, and report his arrest by the way. The hatred that this man turned his back on. But he never expected. Gu Huan wrote a battle plan that coincided with his ideas. In the past, he and Gu Huan were friends only because of the relationship between the two of them as the old marshal. He couldn't help but take care of this person who was adopted by his grandfather since he was a child. Although he didn't like him very much. But because of the battle plan he actually saw a bright spot in Gu Huan other than his grandfather's adopted son, which made him think that it would be a loss to deal with Gu Huan like this. And this battle. Let him witness for himself how different this person feels to him than before. There was a sudden chill on the wrist. Chu Xinglan's relaxed wrist was easily pushed away by Gu Huan. He half-kneeled and raised his head, his eyes fell on Gu Huan, who looked a bit thin after taking the coat from the guard and putting it on his body, his eyes flickered slightly. The students around didn't expect the chief instructor to lose at all. Suddenly, he was in awe of the newly appointed deputy chief instructor with a scarred face. The general is already inhuman, isn't this deputy chief instructor even more inhuman? Just when the battle between the two came to an abrupt end, Yu Yang, who was supposed to be guarding the monitoring room, rushed over panting. General. Gu Huan frowned and looked over. What's wrong? Speaking of Yu Yang's whole face twisted, he glanced at the students gathered around him and dared not speak out, lowered his voice and stuck it in Gu Huan's ear. A class reported that some students were missing. I have long heard that no matter how talented the students of the First Military Academy are, they can cause trouble. How could you disobey the commander's arrangement? On such a remote planet with incomplete construction, does he still dream that there will be satellites monitoring his every move in real time? Even if there is a satellite, in this kind of icy and snowy world, can it display any useful information? It would be fine if the students had optical brains, but for military training, they handed in their optical brains before starting the training, and there was no way to contact him through the optical brains. Hearing this news, Gu Huan's heart skipped a beat. Being here was part of his escape plan, so he was sure to stay out of the limelight. The disappearance of a student is enough to interfere with all his steps. The brows furrowed fiercely, the more anxious he felt, the calmer Gu Huan's expression became. Contact the military department and requisition nearby satellites. Turn on the reconnaissance mode of the starship. Other instructors continue to teach, don't stretch. Yes, General. After quickly issuing several orders, Gu Huan asked. Who is the student who had the accident? Nai Chuan. He was the first student to ask you a question at the freshman ceremony, your loyal fan. When it comes to this incident, the memory of crossing the ocean is still fresh. Gu Huan frowned. Main character? Why is it the protagonist? Also, it is not surprising that it is the protagonist. Where there is a protagonist, something must happen. Otherwise there is no story. Call all the students in their class to me. Chu's England's physical fitness is excellent, although he is far away, he still heard some voices. Any students lost? The students saw the handsome general who was sitting in front, as if he was favored by heaven, but as cold as ice. The whole body was as quiet as a cicada, and those slender peach blossom eyes stared at them, as if all the darkness could not hide in his eyes. The instructor standing in the first row in charge of this class is named Wen Lan. There are rumors among the instructors that he and Gu Huan are in the same class, but each class has a lot of students, and Gu Huan is not very impressed with him. Do you know about Nai Chuan? Gu Huan said indifferently, raising his jaw slightly. Wen Lan weakly wiped the sweat off his head. Here, he might be a bit of a loner. During training, he got separated from us. Although the Imperial Alliance has the name of an alliance, its final nature is still an imperial system. Where there is an emperor, there will naturally be nobles. Although it is no longer popular to say that the students of the first military academy come from noble families, the nobles in the first military academy students still accounted for a large proportion. In the article, when Nai Chuan was in the first grade, there were a few cannon fodder who pushed Nai Chuan away because they were students from a big family. But Gu Huan didn't expect this kind of bullying to start from military training. When the instructor was vague and unable to explain the situation clearly, several students lowered their heads. They all knew what was going on, but they didn't dare to speak when they heard that such a thing had been stabbed to the chief instructor. Gu Huan narrowed his eyes slightly, seeing their guilty conscience. Who allowed you to abandon others? On the battlefield, are you going to leave your companions like this? Listening to this cold and biting question, several students lowered their heads and trembled. Chu's England narrowed his eyes slightly when he heard his words, and there was a hint of sarcasm in his eyes, and he quickly closed them down. I'm not a nobleman either. Gu Huan said coldly. Is it unworthy to be your chief instructor? Of course not. Hearing what the chief instructor said, the instructor's face was full of cold sweat, and those students who bullied Nai Chuan raised their heads in disbelief. How can Nai Chuan's trash be compared with the general? The youngest general with the highest mental talent, was valued by the old marshal. Nai Chuan was just an ordinary kid who was lucky enough to do better in the exam. They just didn't like that the other party was obviously not a nobleman, and Jin entered the same school as them, and not only that, but was remembered by the general at the opening ceremony. This kind of secret jealousy, no one would say it outright. Yu Yang watched from the side and shook his head lightly. Their general dislikes others talking about noble blood, offending the general. With the power given to the general by the principal, it is not impossible to let him expel the entire class. Gu Huan really didn't like it. He used to live as a half-elf, and he hated people who were judged by birth. Gu Huan looked at the few students who were waiting to be criticized very coldly. He glanced at the instructor standing aside again. He stood up straight away and left the room. Garbage, you'd better pray that people come back safely. Looking at the back of the admiral leaving, he said truthfully across the ocean. If he doesn't come back, what awaits you will be more than just dropping out of school. It wasn't until Gu Huan returned to the lounge that he remembered that there was a new deputy chief instructor behind him. This deputy chief instructor was specially sent by the old marshal to help him because he was afraid that he would encounter some unexpected situation due to his mental state and could not solve it. Since it was specially arranged, he had to give him some face. "I'm sorry, this happened when you just came here." Going overseas to deal with the follow-up incident, Gu Huan didn't follow anyone behind him. He sat on the sofa with some annoyance, propped his head and closed his eyes to rest. It's not because he was really upset by something, but mainly because this person followed him, and he was very restless. Chu Xinglan broke the silence for a while. "General Gu, what do you think of the aristocratic system?" Gu Huan didn't reply for a while. Chu Xinglan asked and answered by himself. "If it's for power, it's okay to praise the stinky feet of those nobles. Betray your friends, break your spine, as long as you have power, you can do anything." This answer seemed to have touched a certain skinny general with his eyes closed. He suddenly opened his eyes, and stared at Chu Xinglan with some kind of emotion burning from those golden glazed pupils. Chu Xinglan didn't waver, and asked back. "What did I say wrong, General?" Of course Chu Xinglan didn't think so, he deliberately said it for Gu Huan to hear. He knew that he shouldn't be so aggressive, he should crawl forward like every outstanding predator in the world, and finally bite the neck of the prey, giving him a fatal blow, instead of poking the other's sore spot again and again, but facing Gu Huan, he just couldn't calm down. He wanted to tear off the other party's mask. Why did he even want to see the other party's angry eyes? Those cold golden eyes were more like a lively person dyed with this color. "No, you said nothing wrong." Gu Huan's eyes were as cold as metal with edges and corners, shining with an indifferent metallic luster. But the method of flattery is too low-end, and it will never climb to the height of stepping them down. Chu Xinglan's throat moved slightly. "Then what to do, General?" Gu Huan's voice didn't fluctuate. "Don't treat yourself like a dog, otherwise, even if you become a famous dog, no one will take you seriously." Chu Xinglan looked at those eyes that were as dazzling as falling stars. He is very sure of one thing. If he was told in the end that the other party only joined the emperor's uncle for the sake of power, he would be very disappointed. That would tarnish those beautiful eyes. Gu Huan's order got feedback quickly. "A clue has been found. Someone stole our internal data. The person who captured the boy should be related to the interstellar pirates we hunted down earlier. The other party may have an insider. But we haven't been able to find that insider yet." "Interstellar pirates?" Gu Huan clasped his hands together in front of the table, listening to Yue Yang's report. A group of people escaped while the interstellar pirates were being held. The military department just found out about it. On the way to fight against the interstellar pirates, the prince was sucked by the black hole due to the loss of energy of the mech. The original owner could help but watched him fall into the black hole. Only a few people knew about it. Most people only know that the prince is missing. Fortunately, there was reinforcement from the original owner, who successfully rescued a batch of Imperial secret weapons from the interstellar pirates and protected the rights and interests of the Imperial Alliance. Promoted to general. Including the interstellar pirates themselves think so. So after the prince disappeared, Gu Huan became the main target of revenge for the interstellar pirates. Gu Huan raised his forehead, his black hair fell from between his fingers, his eyebrows and eyes sank. Their target was me. One life for another. Exchange hostages. They are already desperados and will demand anything their toes can think of. The monitoring screen suddenly flickered continuously, and Gu Huan raised his head in silence. There is only a short line of words on the blue screen. "Tonight at 8 o'clock. Come alone to abandon the lighthouse. Someone will tell you the location of the students. Don't play tricks. I know exactly which soldiers are around you. Bring one more, and his life will be lost. General, you can't go alone. Yu Yang wanted to stop Gu Huan. It's very risky, and if you think about it rationally, you shouldn't go. It's not worth the general's life just for a student. They can investigate again and send troops directly to destroy their hiding place. Much better than Gu Huan taking the risk himself. In the case of unequal information, if I take any of you, I will threaten the life of that student. Gu Huan asserted. Yu Yang clenched his fists tightly. Of course he knew that the student's life might be in danger. But the values of the two are completely different. Gu Huan raised his hand to stop him, but in the second half of the sentence, he himself is not the Holy Father. But as the protagonist, the other party really cannot die. If his butterfly wings wiped out the protagonist, the insect swarm afterward would definitely be a big trouble. If it were another person today, and the prince was kidnapped here, he would definitely save him. Even if he wants to kill him in the future. Don't worry, I'm not going to die. Nichuan didn't know how he endured the initial hunger. The kidnappers didn't want him to live at all. There, he talked about what kind of villain the general he admired, and it was impossible to come to rescue him. How could the chief instructor be the kind of villain you mentioned? Nichuan lay on the ground with a bruised nose and swollen face, angrily denouncing his idol. He will come to save me. Of course we want him to come. He's costing us money and life. Then you still scold him. Nichuan raised his head abruptly. We want him to come and not conflict with us calling him a villain, and we are not his little fans. The vicious pirates pinned Nichuan to the ground. Spit. Then stood up. Boss, do you think Gu Huan will really come? Who knows, anyway, if he doesn't come, we'll kill this brat and throw him in front of his starship, ruining his reputation. Nichuan didn't know whether he was so angry or fainted from fright. Before he fainted, he seemed to hear a familiar voice, but when he rolled his eyes, he had already fainted. I am coming. A cold voice came from the door. At the door, stood a black-haired man who seemed out of place here. He has a dignified manner, a calm and self-possessed look, wearing a broad military uniform, standing in the abandoned wasteland, dazzling like a pearl that has unfortunately fallen into the mud. How is it possible? The pirate leader was dumbfounded. The location he told Gu Huan was not accurate to any room at all. How did Gu Huan accurately search for the room where they kidnapped people? This is actually not a problem at all. It was only recently that Gu Huan discovered that his general state was indeed that of an SS spiritual talent like the original owner, but as long as he performed the meditation that magicians in his previous life would have done in advance, and used magic to use his spiritual power, the equipment used for military camp training would be fine. His mental power threshold can no longer be detected, so he can only roughly estimate that his mental power has exceeded the SSS level. As a former half-elf and former magician, although many spells cannot be performed because of the different rules of the world, he has already led the entire world in terms of mental power alone. It is actually very easy to use mental power to explore the place where Nichuan was tens of meters away. Of course he would not go through the front door openly, of course he would go wherever the guards were weak. Adding the two masterminds here, there are only 7 people in total. Gu Huan walked over a few steps, and the pirates sneered. Gu Huan! Don't think that we will be afraid of you if you come alone. There are 7 of us. At the weakest point, there are still 7 people. This was indeed something Gu Huan hadn't expected at all. But it's better than being surrounded by more than 30 people at the door. He had to rescue Nichuan before the 30 or so people rushed here. Ask him why he doesn't use mechas. The rule of the Imperial Alliance is that during non-wartime and special circumstances such as Zerg attacks, mecha-type weapons are not allowed to be used inside the planet, otherwise the license to use mechas will be revoked. He gracefully jumped over a gleaming energy gun bullet sideways, tens of thousands of ballistic trajectories were printed in his golden eyes, his body curved slightly, avoiding every bullet in a simple way, and remained compliant. The silky black hair exuded a perfect arc, and the relaxed and fearless attitude of not taking the 7 of them seriously made the pirate leader glaring. This is impossible. If he was in the world of Western fantasy, he would definitely hear someone tell him sighingly, he must not underestimate a half-elf, but unfortunately he is in the interstellar world, no one will tell him why someone can do such a non-human operate. Swinging black military robes scraped dust. An energy gun landed on the head of the pirate leader. The remaining 6 people have already fallen to the ground. I surrender. His eyes rolled, and there must be something worse in his heart, but Gu Huan had no time to take care of it for the time being. Because the main character behind this pirate chieftain looks dying. He was always in a daze, motionless, who knew whether he was dead or alive. Threatening the pirate leader with a gun in one hand, Gu Huan lowered his eyes and called softly. Classmate Nai! Classmate Nai! The students lying on the ground did not respond. Ha ha ha, it's useless, neither of you can get out alive. I have notified my 30 brothers to come here, and they should have surrounded this place by now. You are amazing, and you easily dealt with the 7 people here, but you absolutely cannot leave this place. Gu Huan frowned slightly. I still have you as a hostage. Do you think I care about the dozens of people outside the door? Ha ha ha, in order to kill you to avenge the other brothers, we have agreed long ago that no matter what the price is, if my life can be exchanged for yours, my brothers will never be soft. You are very righteous. There are good and bad interstellar pirates. If it weren't for the fact that what this pirates did before, they were all seeking money and killing their lives. Gu Huan wanted them to add him after he left the Imperial Alliance. With more than 30 people, it does take a little time. Gu Huan's face was still calm, a golden light flashed across his eyes, and he looked in the direction of the gate from the corner of his eye. But it seems like it doesn't cost much. The bandit leader noticed something strange. Why are you so calm? The door between the warehouses of the lighthouse was suddenly opened. General, I seem to have won again. Chu Xinglan sat on the mountain of corpses and sea of blood. The scene was extremely spectacular. A person with a scar on his face is not necessarily a bad person, but the scar is indeed a lot of evil. Sitting there, it makes the beta pirates suppressed by him look weak and helpless. The bandit leader carefully identified Chu Xinglan's identity, but finally felt that he did not look like a soldier. Are you a colleague? How much money did Gu Huan give you to help him? I can give you double the price. Sorry, I haven't received my military salary yet. Chu Xinglan glanced at Gu Huan, who was indifferent, and smiled. If you give double, that means no money. I'm too bad. Gu Huan. The interstellar pirates still doubted that Chu Xinglan was really a soldier, but since he said so, there was room for discussion, and then parted the corners of his mouth, showing a negotiable expression. I can give you the coordinates of a planet. We have hidden a lot of treasures there, and you will never lose money. Gu Huan frowned slightly. Because the pirates said that they knew the information of the personnel on the starship, he really did not dare to let other people approach this location. Yueyang and his were stationed a few hundred meters away from this house. It will take a while. The only one who can really support him nearby is the newcomer, Chu Lin, who even he himself doesn't know the details. If Chu Lin really turned against him, it would be very difficult for him. Gu Huan looked at Chu Lin. Brigadier General Chu Linier. Chu Xinglan's dark blue eyes flickered slightly. He didn't think about it before, but now he is really eager to try. If you betray this person now. Tat for tat. Will he panic? Chu Xinglan walked down slowly from the mountain of corpses and sea of blood. Leisurely raising the energy gun in his hand, aiming at those beautiful eyes. The corners of his lips were raised, and in just a breath, he pointed the gun at the leader of the interstellar pirates, who was already showing ecstasy, and his smiling face stayed in that moment forever. Of course I'm your man, Admiral. Alpha's voice is full of magnetism, the tail rises slightly, as if it has a lingering taste, it makes people's ears blush and heartbeat, but Gu Huan is destined not to belong to the range of blush and heartbeat, he ordered calmly. Why did you hesitate just now? Write me a 10,000 word report. So heartless. As if he didn't hear Chu Xinglan's words, Gu Huan passed by the dead interstellar pirate. Suddenly, Gu Huan took 2 steps forward and half-kneeled on the ground weakly. Chu Xinglan immediately walked up. General. He stretched out his hand to prepare pulling Gu Huan to get up. Gu Huan looked at his hands for a long while, but finally did not choose those strong and wide palms, stood up with difficulty, picked up Nichuan who was unconscious on the ground, and walked outside. Chu Xinglan's gaze stayed on his hand for a moment. Wei Wei held it up. Inexplicably feel uncomfortable. It was too natural for him to stretch out his hand just now. Turned on the optical computer, recorded the situation here, and at the same time, there were many streams of information that he hadn't checked. Your Highness! In addition to the people here, the starship that this group of people took has been found. Their starship turned on the hidden mode and hid behind a meteorite group very close to here. Shall we dispose of it? When Chu Xinglan came here this time, Gu Huan aroused his curiosity only partly. The remnants of interstellar pirates appearing in this star field is the main reason why he came here in person. These pirates were Chu Xinglan's enemies a long time ago, and Gu Huan ranks second in the list of interstellar pirates' enemies. Of course, he would not let go of the escaped interstellar felons. Cleans them up. Yes, Your Highness. Chu Xinglan walked out of the abandoned lighthouse, stood on a high place, and looked down. The young general who had just staggered was already surrounded by his guards. Feeling the line of sight, like telepathy, he also raised his gracefully curved jaw. Chu Xinglan took out a bottle of spirits from the subspace ring. With a muffled laugh, he took a sip. Pity. Just for a moment. He really wanted to sabotage the plan and scare him. Gu Huan withdrew his gaze from there, and looked at Nichuan who had woken up. Chief Instructor. Seeing Gu Huan, Nichuan burst into tears. The general really came to save him, and he said that those pirates didn't understand the general at all. How could the idol of all interstellar military students like the general disregard the life and death of their students? Yu Yang couldn't bear to see his tear-eyed appearance. This kid caused so much trouble for them, but don't think about suffering a little flesh and blood from the pirates. They won't deal with it according to military regulations. General. He blatantly disobeyed the military order and left the training circle. This should be a big demerit. Hearing what Yu Yang said, Nichuan widened his eyes and hurriedly explained. Chief Instructor, I didn't leave the training circle on purpose. He didn't want the general to misunderstand that he was a disobedient student. He was indeed out of gregarious, and the number of people in their class was odd, so he was left behind when there were activities involving two-person teams. But he didn't run out by himself. Gu Huan slightly opened his lips, his eyes flickered slightly. Watching Nichuan signal him to continue, the other day I reported to the instructor that I couldn't keep up with the big team, General. Nichuan rubbed his head, afraid that Gu Huan would think he was making excuses. He didn't fall behind on purpose. As for him alone, his speed of action is of course much slower than that of other teams. He is also afraid of losing his way in this kind of desolate star. How could it be possible to run out? Gu Huan frowned suddenly. Have you reported the news to the instructor? Yes, General. Inside their starship. Sure enough, there are spies. If he hadn't rescued Nichuan, this person probably wouldn't have given away his feet so easily. The last time I only paid attention to the students, how could I let him pick himself out? Gu Huan's eyes darkened. Vinland. Where is he now? Catch him back. Gu Huan ordered immediately. This order quickly made Wen Lan, the instructor of Nichuan's class, appear in front of Gu Huan. At this time, his crazy expression was not at all like the gentle and somewhat cowardly instructor before. Stealing our information, revealing our location, personally sending my students to them as hostages. Gu Huan asked, how much did they pay you? Wen Lan clenched her fists tightly, her face turned blue and then pale, and finally exhaled, her whole body became gloomy. No pay at all. You probably don't remember anymore. Wen Lan sneered, I was not only a classmate who was admitted to the military academy in the same class as you, I was also the number one at that time. Although Gu Huan has part of the memory of the original owner, he really can't remember it clearly. Seeing that Gu Huan acquiesced that he didn't remember the incident, Wen Lan was so angry that his head was about to smoke, and he gritted his teeth. Of course you don't remember a little guy like me. But if your teacher is not a marshal, do you think you can still achieve what you are doing now? Facing Wen Lan's questioning, Gu Huan answered calmly. Probably not. Wen Lan never expected that he would get such an answer, and even the next curse stuck in his throat. He admitted it. Gu Huan rolled his eyes. No matter how much you hate me, you shouldn't shoot a student who has nothing to do with it. If it was before, I could let you scold me for 3 days and 3 nights, but now, you have lost the qualification to scold me. In order to hurt him, he did not hesitate to put his own students in danger. After all, this person is no better than the original owner. Wen Lan had been blinded by jealousy for a long time, and couldn't listen to Gu Huan's words at all. In the end, he laughed wildly, this place will soon be surrounded by interstellar pirates. Whether you are an admiral or not, you have to die here. Gu Huan looked at him coldly. Although I don't want this kind of villain to be proud, I also think that pirates are a tricky thing, so I should contact the nearby army to attack and destroy them. At this moment, Yu Yang looked at the information in Guang's brain and touched his head. Admiral, there was a big explosion just after a group of meteorites. Before Gu Huan asked Yu Yang why he mentioned such a thing, he saw Wen Lan's face turned ugly, and he suddenly realized something. Where did the pirates hide the starship? Is it because they are the cannon fodder villain of the cannon fodder villain, so they get the bento faster? He has absolutely no room to play. Gu Huan thought to himself.